Welcome back. Of course, in our 50th year as an independent country, the reality of party politics is as real as anything can be. The reality of the matter is that we have a new government in place. But so far, based on the interviews that we've had here on the Power Breakfast Show, CORD leaders have maintained their stand that they did not lose the elections. In fact, they've gone ahead to even predict the collapse of the government within 2 years. Today we're talking to the CORD Coalition Executive Board Secretary, Eliud Owalo, who has always been linked, of course, to former Prime Minister Raila Odinga. Welcome to the Power Breakfast Show.
Thank you.
Of course, we know you as Raila Odinga's aide, but before that, who were you? I mean, what were you doing?
Well, I've been in management consultancy for the past 15 years, running a consultancy outfit by the name Eliud and Associates. My core area of competence is strategic planning, which I've done for various organizations, both in the private and public sector. In the public sector, I've done strategic planning for several government ministries and parastatals. Private sector, I've done strategic planning for blue chip companies in the East African region. But on the political side, I was a founder member and secretary to the Friends of Raila Lobby Group, which was born in the year preceding the year of the last elections. And then from there, I was tapped from there to go and head the CORD Presidential Campaign Secretariat during the last polls. So that in a nutshell is my background, professionally and in terms of my participation in national politics.
All right. Of course, looking at you as a management consultant and the role that you played when it came to the presidential campaigns, there's an article that was written by Macharia Gaitho, and he basically said you might not have been very good at what you were employed to do, because the victory that Raila expected was actually turned into bitter defeat.
Well, I still maintain what I've said many times before, that CORD did not lose the last elections. We actually won the presidential race. But due to conspiracy between various players who are managing the campaign, who are managing the elections, Raila was not declared the winner of the last presidential race. So specifically, I've got a bone to pick with the IEBC, starting from its own preparation for the elections itself. We saw a very lopsided registration exercise, where areas which were perceived, voter registration exercise, where areas which were perceived to be inclined to our political competitors were given undue advantage during the voter registration exercise, just to up the numbers. Through the facilitation process, you will find a situation where there was a deliberate attempt to disenfranchise voters in CORD strongholds from registering, by simply putting in place certain logistical bottlenecks in the registration process. So the end result was that by the time the registration process was over, there was this lopsided figures in terms of the number of registered voters. Not because youth in CORD strongholds of voters in CORD strongholds did not want to register, but there were some bottlenecks that curtailed the pace of the registration exercise itself.
A lot of people will differ with that. They will say that in Jubilee areas, the politicians deliberately went to campaign for registration. In CORD areas, the politicians, in fact, that what Mutaingunyi wrote, that so-called tyranny of numbers, because he said the election was lost after the registration. You could see and he got the figures. These are the registered voters, and in this area, these are registered voters. So it is the problem of CORD leaders themselves.
The so-called tyranny of numbers, to me, was an artificial conglomeration that was being, it was actually something artificial that was created through a conglomeration of two ethnic communities. But the primary purpose was to create the impression that if you put certain communities together, they will give you the numbers, adequate numbers, to enable you win the presidential race, irrespective of the voting patterns in all other parts of the country. There is really no tyranny of numbers. There is nowhere where two communities will get adequate numbers to win any presidential race, even with the current constitution as it stands. So that basically was a prelude to facilitate rigging of the last elections. It was a scheme to rig the last elections. So the so-called tyranny of numbers, Muktai Ngunyi was actually just a mouthpiece of a scheme that was hatched somewhere else.
The figures, the statistics were there?
Well, those statistics really don't add up. If you put the Kalenjins and the Kikuyus together, you cannot tell me that they'll give you the numbers which will give you a competitive advantage over all the other ethnic communities.
He looked at the registered voters.
He did look at the registered voters.
And what people are saying is that your leaders, or CORD leaders, did not go to campaign for registration. It's not that deliberately IABC went and obstructed the registration. What for?
You see, there's not, you cannot say that the politicians in the CORD strongholds did not go out to mobilize the people to register as voters.
That was the argument.
That was the argument, but it is a fallacy. It is not true. CORD leaders went out and asked people to register, not just in CORD strongholds, but all over the country. We were looking at actually the country as one political entity, because everybody needs to be part and parcel of this political process, the voting political process, if we want really change in this country. So the irony here is that certain individuals over-concentrated within certain ethnic communities, but because the CORD leadership cut across the tribal spectrum of the Kenyan population, we actually, when CORD leaders went out to sensitize all Kenyans to register as voters, not just in our in the CORD predominant areas, but across the country, because actually CORD drew its support from all over the country.
If that was the case, then why did not CORD leaders make noise after registration? And the results were there because there is a window of inspection of registered voters. We didn't hear any noise from candidates saying, "Oh, hey, look, our areas have been screwed up."
Those complaints were raised during the registration exercise. Up to the end of the registration, there were even appeals for extension of the registration period, but the IEBC did not play ball.
Now, of course, currently, I mean, the reality is we have a president. International observers spoke about it. IEBC, the statutory body mandated to give the results, the final results, has made it very clear that Uhuru Kenyatta is the president. The Supreme Court ruled in his favor. He is the president. And whether you like it or not, he's still the president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta. What are you doing about that?
We have not, nobody has said that Uhuru Kenyatta is not the president. But we have equally stated very clearly that we don't agree with the process that led to his being declared the president. But we have to operate within the confines of the law. Now, when the IEBC declared the presidential results, CORD leadership stated that it would move to the courts, the Supreme Court, to challenge those election results, because that was the recourse as provided for in the law. Now, you do remember vividly that during that petition, CORD filed documentary evidence, 800-page documentary evidence, which was struck out by the judges on the pretext of the fact that there was no time to look at that voluminous document. I don't think time as an element can be a substitute to justice or impartiality in an important process as the presidential elections. Now, whereas we may not have agreed with the outcome of the Supreme Court ruling, that was the last resort as far as that was concerned. So we did say as a coalition that we do not necessarily agree with the Supreme Court ruling, but we had to abide by it because there was no other avenue within the confines of the law. And at that point in time, I stand corrected. if any member of the CORD coalition leadership came up and said, we are not accepting this Supreme Court ruling, Kenya may not have been the same. It could have actually been worse than 2008, the period after the 2007 elections. So, with that now water under the bridge, we accepted that Uhuru Kenyatta was actually sworn in as the president of the country, and we are living with it. But that does not mean that we accept that he won the elections fairly. The two are different.
All right.
If that case, that document which you said was refused to accept by the Supreme Court, you claim is evidence that there was rigging.
Oh, yes.
How come that information is not public domain? If there are really evidence, why has court not published that? Because now the matter is out of court. How come that document has not been put in public domain so that you can see? In this constituency, there were 13,000 voters, but registered voters. But those who voted were 14,000.
You see, we have been waiting for the IEBC to release the official results.
They have.
They have, which results actually are under dispute. First of all, before they released these results, it took them quite a long time to do that because there were inconsistencies in the statistics. The number of people who voted for the president at presidential level were more than the number of people who voted at other levels.
It claims 1 million.
Actually, over 1 million, about 1.7 million voters. There was a discrepancy of about 1.7 million voters. Let me finish. Now, if the IEBC was not struggling to reconcile the statistics, there was no justification in taking that amount of time to officially release the results. Now, even these results, they have not released them voluntarily. They were actually compelled by a committee of parliament to release these results. As we speak today, we cannot say that IEBC has officially released the results of the last elections. What they have done is that they have given those results to a committee of parliament. And even during that process, the chairman of the IEBC refused to do so under oath.
Oh, he was willing.
He didn't do it under oath.
The following day he came, he wanted to take an oath.
Yeah. But so far, as things stand today, he has not.
The discrepancy in that shows about 58,000. The figures released to the IEB, to the parliamentary committee. Not a million.
You see what has happened? We have been analyzing those statistics, which were submitted to the parliamentary committee. And you realize that we have been looking at that against the Form 35, the Form 36, and Form 34 that was used to declare the results at the time of the elections. You'll realize that there is an adulteration of those figures. And actually, as we speak, we are coming up with an elaborate report which we are soon going to release to the public to show Kenyans what has happened from the time the IEBC has done from the time they declared elections after the 4th March elections up to this time when they submitted these statistics. There's been a lot of cooking of figures, and we have got a team of experts that is analyzing that, and our report is almost ready. Perhaps in the course of this week, we will now have this out in the public domain.
And purpose?
The purpose is just to show Kenyans that there was foul play in as far as the last elections is concerned, and IEBC is culpable, and based on the same, and even what we have witnessed during the recent Makwani by-elections, the IEBC, as is currently constituted, cannot be allowed to conduct any other elections, general elections, or any other election for that matter in this country.
There is a way of removing them.
Oh, yes.
There's a process.
There is a process of doing that.
Yes.
And you do not embark on a process before you justify that. By analyzing these figures, that's the beginning of the justification. We want to show Kenyans the foul play that was undertaken by IEBC as far as the last elections is concerned.
Now, just looking at, hearing you speak, it's very clear that court leaders are absolutely very clear that the whole process was flawed. But at least we can talk on the same breath as far as Uhuru Kenyatta being president. But the recent comments from court leaders, including predicting the collapse of the Jubilee government within 2 years, is really worrying. In fact, court has been